Welcome back guys to a brand new video. In this video, I'm taking my Ryobi angle grinder and I'm trying to figure out what is wrong with it. When I try to turn it on, I twist it, it works a bit, and then it doesn't work, and then I bump it, it works. I think that there's some sort of internal failure. Maybe the cord has an open circuit in it, but in today's video, I'm gonna pull it apart and I'm gonna figure out what's wrong with it. There's also an extra thing that's wrong with it. The detent on the back of it that locks the spindle so you can undo your discs has failed. So we're also gonna use the lathe to make a new part for that as well. So let's get into it. So at this point you can see that the angle grinder definitely has some sort of internal electrical failure. When you twist the outer housing, you can see that internally something is actually connecting and allowing the motor to spin. From previous experience with this kind of thing, I have the feeling that the internal brushes are worn down to the point where they're no longer making contact, or at least the end of the cable where it enters the angle grinder has failed and has an open circuit intermittently. Now that I've removed the internals of the angle grinder, I carefully inspect it and nothing seems to be out of the ordinary. The commutator does have some slight wear on there where the brushes have been in contact with it, but everything seems to be okay at this point. If ever you find yourself thinking, maybe I'd like to have a crack at trying to fix it myself, but think that maybe you don't have the skills or the knowledge to do so, I started off that way and I've just developed my skills over time by having a go, taking the right precautions before pulling things apart, like disconnecting power and those sorts of things, and just taking a mental note of how it come apart, place the screws in an order so that when it comes time to putting it back together, you can remember how they went. Taking photos and all those sorts of things will help you reassemble it after you've pulled it apart. Now that the rear end of the angle grinder has been removed, I've found where the brushes are located. Brushes are an item that generally wear down in most electrical motors and will result in the issue that I'm having in this video. This section of wiring also looks damaged and suspicious, so I will use the multimeter to do some testing. After uncovering the black electrical tape, I clearly remembered that a few years ago I've already carried out a repair on this before. Before removing wires like this, always take a photo, draw it down on a bit of paper so that in the future you remember the orientation of the coloured wires. Now I can clearly see that the carbon brush is completely worn down and has barely any spring to it. The two carbon brushes will definitely need replacing. At this point, I've set the multimeter to ohms and I'm going to test the electrical lead from one end to the other. This test will let me know whether there's an internal open circuit within the lead, both with a wriggle test or just sitting stationary. A reading close to 0 is definitely satisfactory, so 0.4 or 0.3 is a pass. This final step of the test is called a wriggle test. What this does is it exposes an internal open circuit where wires can be barely touching, but through movement may become fully open circuit. So it is definitely something that can be missed when you're doing a stationary test, so always include a wriggle test. That's definitely a pass on the electrical lead. I do believe it is just the brushes that need to be replaced. Once the spring that pushes on the back of the brush is moved to the side, you can grab the copper cabling and slide the brush straight out. After searching through the things in my shed, I did find some brushes that I can use on this job. But if you're not as lucky as I am, you can definitely purchase these online and they are very inexpensive. When comparing the two together, it's crazy to see how much is actually worn off the original one. The replacement process is quite simple. You just remove the female terminal off the housing, slide the new one back on, and then slide the carbon brush back into its position, followed by putting the spring back on the rear end of it. And just like that, the carbon brush is put back into its housing and is completely functional again. Now let's repeat the same process a second time. Before we reinstall those brushes back into the housing, this is the section that I mentioned earlier on in the video, where the detent has come away from the top of the angle grinder head. I'm going to replace it with a handmade one using my lathe. If you're wondering what the detent does, well, it locks the motor head into one position and prevents rotation while you're replacing the disc. So I'm using a drill bit for this part because I found it's the easiest way to measure the internal diameter of that hole. Finally, I get the chance to use my lathe. I'm still an absolute rookie when it comes to using this thing, but the more hours I put in and the more information I research, the better I get. So there ain't nothing to it but to do it. So at this stage, what I'm doing is I'm turning down the metal piece to be the 6mm that I measured earlier in the video. This will be the section that pushes in and locks up the motor. Making parts like this is such a tedious thing. It's such a game of trial and error until you get it right. The pin now is mostly made, so all I'm left to do is to face the part and put a chamfer on it. Now that it fits in the housing, I'm just testing of whether it locks the motor up or not, and once I've done that, I need to shorten the length of the pin. And yes, to all you mad machinists out there, I could have set this back up in the lathe and used the parting tool. But due to the amount of stick out, I really didn't feel confident in doing so. So I just stuck to doing it this way. This last step using the lathe is to machine a groove for the circlip that is to be mounted to the tip of this pin. And now we're up to that part of the process where you have to see whether you can actually remember how to reassemble the thing that you've pulled apart and whether you've actually fixed it. The amount of times in the past where I've spent hours on trying to repair something to only find that when I've reassembled it, I didn't fix it. But I guess it's all part of the fun, and this is exactly why I do it, because in the end, when you do fix it, it's very rewarding and it actually saves something from going to the dump. These two screws, after repairing this job, I realized that I probably didn't need to remove, but they were there, so I unscrewed them. When reinstalling these parts, a lot of them are offset where the housings can only go one way, so this makes it a lot easier to remember because the chances are you're not going to be able to force it the other way. So after checking my notes, blue on the left and black on the right. Now it's finally showtime. Will this actually work after spending all these hours? What an absolute relief. It actually works and I was successful in fixing it. So the last thing to do is put the blade guard cover on, put a disc on it and see whether that detent that I created actually works. Well, that's another win, it works, and the job is finally complete. Alright guys, so there you have it. The Ryobi angle grinder has been fixed in this video. It was the brushes that were completely worn out. They had no meat left in them, so we got those replaced in this video, and you saw me make the new button for the back of the angle grinder there to lock the disc into place. So thank you for sticking around to the end. I hope you liked the video. Remember to like, subscribe, share, do all those things if you want. They're free and it helps the channel grow. So until next time, I'll see you in the next one.